here we were looking at, are all negatives equally corrosive in a relationship? And we actually were able to identify 4 things that were the most corrosive for the disasters. And I called them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So, that comes from the book of Revelations by John, where, the end of the world, these 4 horsemen ride together and they're pestilence, famine, war, all that kind of stuff. But in a couple's conversation, the 4 things are, first of all, criticism. And criticism is the first horseman of the apocalypse. And what criticism is really pointing your finger at your partner and really saying, I've been watching you and observing your behavior. As far as I can tell, I'm pretty much perfect. But you are defective. This relationship is not going to go anywhere until you get therapy and change your personality. And then they point out all the ways in which their partner is defective. And the critical person, really doesn't mean to be nasty. They're trying to be constructively critical. And they're hoping that their partner will respond to them by saying, John, thank you so much for pointing out all the ways in which I am failing as a human being. Can we have lunch next week and you can tell me more? That's what the critic is kind of hoping for, some appreciation and recognition, And they'd like to hear something like, you're such an intelligent observer, too, so insightful. But instead, what they get is the second horseman of the apocalypse, which is defensiveness. And defensiveness is either, in our lab, was either counterattack, right? Coming back and saying, well, let me point my finger at you. You're not so perfect. And I've been observing you, and here's what's wrong with you. Okay, that's one way of being defensive. And the other way is to act like an innocent victim. It's not my fault. I really try hard. What about all the good things I do in this relationship? They don't get noticed. I can't do anything right. No matter what I try, it's always wrong with you. And some people are really good enough so that they can do the innocent victim and the counterattack at the same time. They're really good at this defensiveness. Now, what are the masters doing? Well, first of all, in terms of the first horseman, criticism, rather than pointing their finger at their partner, they're pointing their finger at themselves. And they're kind of minimizing this and saying, this is not a big deal, and, this relationship is okay, but, I do feel a little bit frustrated when I try to talk to you about my day and you're not really listening, and, you're on your cell phone and you're texting 3 people at the same time, and, that kind of hurts my feelings. And I really need you to put away your cell phone during dinner, So they're really specific, and they're saying, here's what I need. This is my recipe for success with me. And even if their partner is critical, what the masters do, rather than getting defensive, is they take responsibility, even for a small part of the problem. They say stuff like, that's interesting. You might be right. I don't think I've been listening to you very well. And I've been kind of grumpy lately. So tell me more about what's going on for you. I want to hear what you're thinking, what you're feeling about this. So they take responsibility. And even if you take responsibility for a small part of the problem, it's enough to diffuse things. Now, the third horseman is what we call contempt. And contempt is anything you say from a superior place, right? If you think you're better than your partner, like you're more punctual, or you're better informed on a topic, or you're, think you're more intelligent, or you're a better parent, or you're neater than your partner, or a better dresser, any kind of superiority, you sort of talk down to your partner. And contempt, most contempt was, insults or name calling, or, something like that, or mockery of your partner, repeating your partner's words in a mocking way. And contempt was our best predictor of divorce in heterosexual couples. And the masters really did almost none of it. And the disasters did a fair amount of contempt. And some of them even did contempt when they were talking about how the day went. Like I remember this one husband who said to his wife, why don't you go first talking about your day? Won't take you very long. Okay? right away, starting with contempt. So not only was contempt our best predictor of relationship breakup and divorce, but it was a predictor of how many infectious illnesses the recipient of contempt would have in the next 4 years. And the Glazers at Ohio State University were able to actually study white blood cells and lymphocytes and find that contempt was related to T cells not proliferating as well, and natural killer cells, which really police against tumor development, not being as cytotoxic, not being as effective at policing tumors. So really there's a wide spectrum degradation of the immune system with contempt. So contempt you can think of as sulfuric acid for love and sulfuric acid for health in relationships. And it became one of my hobbies to collect ways in which people can be contemptuous. Became really interested in this, and I discovered that, for example, in Kentucky, when we gave a workshop, that there's a particular way of being contemptuous in the American South. And so, for example, you can say almost anything nasty about somebody if you say the right words after it. So like you could say, look at that woman. Doesn't she realize she looks like a slut in that dress? Bless her heart. So if you say bless her heart, you can say the most vile things in the world in the American South. And one of my favorite ways of being contemptuous is correcting somebody's grammar when they're angry with you. So if my wife says, now, I could care less about that, John, I say, just a minute, Julie. The proper way to say that is, I couldn't care less, not I could care less. Now, what was your point? You know, I like that one a lot. That's sort of the professorial way of being contemptuous. Now, what are the masters doing instead of contempt? Well, that turns out to be really pretty interesting, because we really learned about that in the apartment lab. Because what they're doing is they really are, in very small moments, creating a culture of appreciation and respect and affection in the relationship. And they're really building what we call the fondness and admiration system, which is about respect and affection. And they're building that in very small ways. You know, they're just kind of saying things like, thanks for making the bed. I enjoyed the conversation at dinner. That was fun. Or, you know, I watched you playing with the baby, and you're an amazing, amazing father. You know, I just love the way you play with our son. And, you know, and they're saying this stuff a lot. And they're sort of building an emotional bank account in the relationship. And I think the real difference between the masters and the disasters there in the area of contempt is that the masters have a habit of mind in which they're scanning their social environment for things they can appreciate and communicating that appreciation, you know, really clearly in the moment. Whereas the disasters are really scanning their social environment for other people's mistakes and trying to correct them and, you know, and make them, and, you know, if they can correct people's mistakes, then maybe they won't be so unhappy. That's kind of what they're thinking. And we found in our lab that this habit of mind transfers to their children as well. So that the disasters, when they're teaching their kid, their 4-year-old kid, something new, they really give the kid a lot of information, and then they hang back and wait for their child to make a mistake, and then they come in and criticize their child. Whereas the masters wait for their child to do something right, and then they come in and use very specific praise. So in one case, you know, the criticism, when people are trying to learn something, they make more mistakes and their performance goes down. Whereas if you wait for people to do something right and give them a little more information and praise them, their performance goes up. So this criticism is really a very interesting sort of habit of mind. And you might think, well, you know, the masters, their habit of mind, that's sort of like looking at the world with rose-colored glasses. That's got to be an inaccurate way of looking at the world. But it turns out that actually it's more accurate. And it's really the disasters who distort even neutral things as negative. It's like they have a chip on their shoulder, and they really see things as negative even when they're not, okay? They're ready to respond to negativity. They scan their partner's face when he or she walks into a room, and they see a storm building, even if it's not there. And the other thing about the negative habit of mind, and this was a study done in 1980 by Robinson and Price. They put observers in people's homes just measuring positive things between husband and wife. And they trained the husband and wife to do the same thing. And they found if they were happily married, the outside observer and the partners were completely in line. But if they were unhappily married, the partners missed 50% of their partner's positivity. You just didn't see it, right? Which is a cool thing if you're a therapist, because you can change people very quickly, because all you have to do is change perception. You have to know how to change perception, but then they'll see 50% of the behavior that's already there. You don't have to change behavior, it's already there. All that positive stuff is there, and people are not seeing it. Okay, so the fourth horseman of the apocalypse was very interesting, and we call this stonewalling. And stonewalling was really an index of emotional withdrawal from the relationship. Now, usually when people are listening, it turns out around the planet, they really give speakers cues that they're tracking. Not necessarily that they agree, but they keep their bodies kind of open, they maintain eye contact, they nod their heads, they move their facial muscles, and they utter these brief vocalizations. So they go, oh yeah, could be, oh, yeah, oh, yeah. Oh, no kidding. Oh, yeah. So that's a listener. The stonewaller doesn't do that. They look away and down. No facial movement. No vocalization. No head nodding. And so this looks to the speaker like disapproval. And so the speakers kind of think, I'm not getting through. And maybe the 10-pound cannonball is not doing anything. Let's try the 25-pound cannonball. So negativity escalates when people are stonewalling. So we're really curious about this stonewalling thing. First of all, 85% of our stonewallers in heterosexual relationships were guys. This appears to be something men do. Women do it some, but not a lot. And so we were very curious whether when we study lesbians, do lesbians stonewall? And they absolutely do. So it wasn't biology quite, or gender. But then we discovered that a heart rate of above 100 beats a minute was a good predictor of people stonewalling in the next 10 seconds. So we thought, this is something about calming down. So we started interviewing guys in heterosexual relationships about what they were thinking and feeling when they were stonewalling. And this is kind of what's going through the stonewaller's mind. Okay. How long can she go on like this? The woman's going to give herself a heart attack. I could say something now. Don't say anything. You always make it worse. Just, try to leave as soon as you can. Tell her you got somewhere to go. You got some important thing to go to. Tell her anything. That happened 6 years ago. I can say something now. Don't say anything. 10 minutes to the game. She can't touch me then. So this is what's going on in the mind of the stonewaller. Really a self-soothing, don't make it worse kind of thing. Now, the masters also, have this physiological arousal, but they cope with it differently. They really breathe, they self-soothe, they find ways of calming down. Like one guy who said, in the middle of this argument that he was having with his wife, and his heart rate got really high, and then he said, say, those are nice shoes. And she said, well, they weren't very expensive shoes. He said, well, they're pretty shoes. So are you going to wear those to the dinner party this week? Yeah, I thought I would. Well, do you have something to go with it? I think I might, but I might have to get something new. Well, you should really, And his heart rate went down, and her heart rate went down. And then they got back to the issue. They self-soothed, and then they got back to the issue. Okay, so those are the things that predict divorce. Now,